730, my testosterone came at 400. And I was like, shit. After that, I did my testosterone at T, and guess what it was? 700.
What?
Yeah, 300-point increase just by changing the time. People think randomized control trials are at the top, but it's a bit more nuanced than that. If I was to just look at this level of evidence and start making claims, the chance of that being confirmed in a human interventional trial years down is maybe 5 to 10%. Very low.
What is functional medicine?
Trying to pick up dysfunction as early as possible. Chronic diseases are.
You did a very good experiment and you sent your samples to some 14-15 different labs. What was the result?
They'll take your sample and chuck it down the wash basin and give you a fake result. I'll clarify further. Is it proven that zinc supplementation actually improves that? A lot of people today who are extremely science minded who don't actually understand how science works. Like is an example. You might have seen the guy on Twitter.
We've spoken a lot about research studies. What do you consider as a good quality evidence?
That can throw off many results. Your thyroid hormones, your antibodies, like a lot of results. You can do.
You'll get in trouble for saying that.
No, I'll elaborate on that.
Bro, Yohan, thanks for doing this, man.
Anytime, bro. My pleasure.
So, bro, first of all, I want to set the stage for this conversation, right? We want this conversation to empower people to understand about health and give them actual tools so that they can use and go ahead in their fitness journeys. So that is where we want to start from. And now I want to know from your own mouth that what do you do and how did you land up in nutrition?
So firstly, I'll try to keep this as non-technical and non-geeky as possible because there's important information I'll share that if like the viewers sit and apply it in their life, they can see radical transformations in their health. In terms of my background and what I do, like basically I got really interested in alternative health and what's known as functional medicine today. Back in college, I had a spiritual awakening. After that, I wanted to kind of...
what is functional medicine?
It's basically like 21st century model of healthcare. Like some people call it medicine 3.0, where we're not just taking the best of science that's published in the form of like human clinical trials and long-term observational studies, but we are bridging the best of the evidence of what's seen in these trials with personalized health data. So it involves extensive testing, like and interpreting the testing in the correct way, like not relying on standard laboratory reference ranges, but trying to pick up dysfunction as early as possible. So we have a very preventive model where we are trying to test aggressively and extensively in an early stage, so we can pick up mild dysfunctions also. Like for example, you don't have to wait till you develop diabetes. You can catch very early physiological disruptions in the insulin response, like before it even progresses to pre-diabetes or even to insulin resistance. Similarly for kidney decline, like you don't have to wait till your creatinine is already high and then you think of intervening. You can catch early kidney dysfunction. So for every single chronic disease, we have early markers which can help us to intervene at an appropriate time when the damage is less, and that gives us the maximum chance of success. So it's basically taking the diagnostic data and not using pharmaceutical medications, whereas trying to find the actual causes for why these diseases develop to begin with, which are rooted in diet, lifestyle, nutrient deficiencies, heavy metal overload, and various other functional factors, rather than having that mindset where if you fall sick, you just take like paracetamol. If you have pain, you take ibuprofen. So it's getting out of the whole culture and actually starting to think about how are your lifestyle, diet, and nutrient deficiencies, along with some other factors, contributing to the development of chronic disease, and then taking control at that level by changing
making your house earthquake proof, and not once the earthquake hits, that's when you get.
Yeah, it's a very conventional medicine is very reactionary, and there is a very important place for emergency medicine and for doctors. But that should be ideally reserved for when people have got to that stage where we can't really, it's very difficult to reverse, with these factors. But for most chronic diseases, this should always be
diseases for people.
I'm
sorry, I'm going to ask
you. We can dumb it down. We try to dumb it down as much as possible. Yeah. I might say some things assuming some knowledge, but you can always kind of make me simplify things further. So chronic diseases are a complex set of like multifactorial processes which land up developing into a problem which has effects on many body systems. So it's different from a symptom. Like I'll give you some examples that like contrast between a symptom and a disease. So acne can be a symptom, but PCOS can be the disease. So when we say PCOS, I mean polycystic ovarian syndrome. It's a very common problem
Very
that a lot of
prevalent these
women
days, yeah.
women suffer from. So it's a very multifactorial disease which is accompanied by increase in inflammation and insulin resistance and imbalances in the gut microbiome and a lot of other things, which not just make someone have acne but increase the risk of different diseases because the women have high testosterone, so that has other effects on like not just acne but even facial hair developing actual cysts in the vaginal area. So a disease has much wide ranging implications than a symptom. Like for example, if we take diabetes again, which is very common, so people often experience like retinopathy. They'll get damage in the eyes and they can go blind as a result of having diabetes, or the nephrons in the kidney get damaged. So that can lead to like kidney disease and then the symptoms of that eventually. So that's the basic contrast overall between a disease and a symptom.
Yeah, right. That makes sense. So chronic disease is basically the root cause of a symptom that a person is facing,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, and the disease itself, depending on which disease we're talking about, there are different processes going on that will lead to the disease outcome, and then that will have its symptomatic effects.
Makes sense. So now when we were talking about functional medicine where you had mentioned that functional medicine is basically not just looking at long-term studies, but also looking at short-term observational trials and making use of those studies as well, right?
I'll clarify further. We are basically taking the studies, like we'll talk about this when we discuss like scientific studies and like different types and like, what we should give more importance to. But there are many human randomized control trials out there, which is the gold standard for scientific evidence, which shows us cause and effect. Like if we are ever confused about if X causes Y, we'll take two groups of people, we'll keep everything else the same, we'll just tweak that one thing and then see if it has the effect on the thing we think it has or not. That's how we understand causality in science. So we're not just looking at that, but we are looking at the blood markers and trying to personalize the interventions based on what is proven in the research and the person's own like genetics as well as the blood markers being off. So there's a lot of room for customization. We will touch on this when we cover like what diet I think is the best and in general people should follow. But even within that way of eating, there's a ton of room for customization because we have like 100 200 different factors we can measure in the blood, and each of these being high or low indicates like a problem unique to you, which we can use different interventions for and customize things further in that broad.
It's very person oriented.
Yes,
but they're all backed by science. Like this is all based on scientific literature and what is published already and what is from the researches that we know of, right?
Yes. So my approach to deal with symptoms is coming from two angles. One, I'm trying to look at the clinical trials. I'll give you practical examples. Let's say again we're talking about acne. So let's take zinc for example. Okay, so a zinc deficiency in the blood, we know it is a risk factor for having acne. Now, when I say I'm looking at the blood markers to decide what interventions people should get, that includes studies which are done on these blood biomarkers, where we take two groups of people in general, and we might take a group which has acne and then we might take a control which doesn't have any acne, and we might find a connection for the acne people, like their zinc levels are much lower compared to the controls. So we get some idea from there, okay, there may be a connection. We need to further confirm that. We can't just go on a correlation or observation like that.
Correlation.
We need to confirm that with causal data. So then I try to find trials where like, is it proven that zinc supplementation actually improves acne? And there are many trials where we supplement people with zinc and their acne improves. So we're bridging both of that. We're bridging the observational data, like the correlations, again, which are very important part of coming to conclusions. A lot of people today who are extremely science minded, who don't actually understand how science works, they will just like liver doc is an example. You might have seen the guy on Twitter. So he's like the hardcore mainstream like allopathic medicine. There are some people from there who tend to get extremely reductionist. Like they will not think anything has merit until it has a human randomized control trial backing it. That's the very that's another extreme edge also. When I'll actually explain how science works and how researchers actually develop models and how we start out with anecdotes and we come to a place where we can confirm things scientifically. It's like every step of the way you're getting some more confidence. It's never like 100% or zero. So observational studies where we are seeing correlations are also extremely important because modern day observational studies are just for many things. So I'll give you an example. Like let's take red meat. So there's data showing that Hong Kong has like very high red meat consumption, and they also tend to live very long. So that kind of data is very crude. Or let's take the example of heart disease. Someone, like a lot of people online believe that the vegetable oils that we have are a leading cause of heart disease, and they'll point you to like curves where they'll show you, okay, from 1900 the heart disease rates have gone up, and also like the seed oil consumption has gone up since the 1970s or so, and that's a very crude correlation. It's not adjusted at all. It's just like looking at two things in a very plain way. So like very good epidemiology research which gets published in journals today is not like that. We are trying to rule out what other variables might be playing a role in that. So I mean, for example, like you could look at the data and think, okay, there might be a correlation, but then you can start adjusting for different things. So if you adjust for calorie intake, if you adjust for ApoB levels, if you adjust for like different things we know cause heart disease, you will stop seeing association between like omega-6 and heart disease. Same thing for red meat. Like a lot of people make the argument that like these studies which show association between Americans, like higher red meat being linked to cancer and colorectal cancer and heart disease and stuff, they might say that, oh, the people who have red meat also smoke, also drink, also like other engage in other reckless things,
unhealthy practices.
But I don't think these people actually read the studies, because the researchers adjust for all these things. They adjust for fruits and vegetables, they adjust for BMI, they adjust for smoking.
Oh, right.
Yeah, and then we can tease out the independent effect. Like you can't rule out every single variable, but at least the major ones we think that would be having an effect, like stress or all these other common things. It's very easy to adjust for them and rule those out. And then we know, okay, whatever's left is meat and something else we haven't thought of.
Yeah, true.
Yeah.
Makes sense. So now we have discussed a lot of, in the conversation that we've had, we have spoken a lot about research studies. A lot of people use research studies as a tool and throw on people online that this study showed this research showed this. So now you tell me, according to you, what do you consider as a good quality evidence?
Okay, let's start from very crude basics. Let's just think that we are living in this area and there's a neighborhood, and we are trying to determine the effect of omega-3s on let's say heart health. Okay. So we might just look at associations in the neighborhood, that we might see, like survey people and find the households that are eating more fish, they seem to have less heart attacks. So that's your first very crude observation. Or even before that, you might have someone come and tell you, like my family takes a lot of omega-3s, take fish oil supplements, and हमारे घर पे तो भाई family में heart disease होता ही नहीं. So that's a form of, like, you start there. It's an anecdote. You can't just dismiss it. Even anecdotes have value. Like they might lead to a causal confirmation, but there's a lot of steps that like we have to perform to go from there to rule out everything else, so that we can isolate the fish oil and show that that's actually the thing that's causing the heart disease. So it just gives us clues that we start there. Then we might see it, same thing playing out in a larger setting where we are serving other people and we're finding some kind of link over there. So थोड़ा और confidence बढ़ता है. उसके बाद we come to the level of ecological data. So here we are just looking at countries. Okay, so we just look at countries and record different kind of intake patterns of people, and then we'll try to see, okay, like
general
seafood
habits of countries.
And then we'll try to stratify them, like seafood intake kitna hai countries ka, and what is the heart disease rate of the country. That way. That is still like very low. Okay, that's because there are many variables that can be impacted, and that's very unadjusted. Like as I said, usme kuch bhi, like researchers are not accounting for the role of other factors. It's just looking at correlations between different countries, and that's a bit higher than the neighborhood example. Then we come to actual observational studies. So this is a category where it also comes under the term epidemiology. So epidemiology studies mein there are three types. There is a retrospective study, there's a case control study, and there's a prospective study. So retrospective studies are looking back at the past. We might take hospital records of people who've died, look at their omega-3 blood levels, and see if there's any association between like the who died more and like what omega-3 levels you had. That is still weaker than a study looking at the future, because there could have been other things which could have influenced that in the past.
Because in the future you can adjust things right now and then see what
you can start the experiment now and then look into the future.
Alright.
That's much more likely to give you a causal understanding after adjusting than looking back at the past. Makes that sense, way. Then there's a case control study also, which just looks at the present. Like the zinc example, you might take the acne thing I told you. Like you might take a group which has acne, you might take a control who doesn't have. Just look at the blood levels, like in a comparison. You might find that this X group control group had higher zinc levels than this, but it still doesn't prove causality as
Yeah,
such.
true.
Because we see this for many other markers where we thought something is causal that way, but it doesn't land up panning out when we actually do control trials. It's just like correlations, which because those markers are being affected by other things
also.
than the actual zinc itself. And then we have prospective studies. This would be the highest form of evidence within the observational studies.
Alright.
Again, just to simplify what observational studies mean, it's just looking at people. You're not making interventions.
Alright.
You're just looking at people, and then the different ways of looking at people that I'm discussing, and it goes from like low level to high level in the hierarchy that I mentioned. In prospective studies, this is one of the most powerful study designs within observational research. It can tell us a lot, and it can really tell you about long-term health risks, which randomized controlled trials cannot. So in prospective studies, we have the advantage where we can take very large sets of people. We can take lakhs of people. Costs are much lesser than doing a interventional study. We can measure markers at like whatever we're interested in, the outcome or the blood marker. We can measure it at periodic levels, and then we follow people up and we see who had what marker and what the future risk of disease is. I'll give you an example of this. So there are studies that have been done on hemoglobin, and we know from very large scale studies that for men having hemoglobin like between I think 14 to 15 is the most optimal.
Ideal.
And as you start falling under that, your risk of chronic kidney disease goes up. So this is not a present problem. Okay, so functional medicine helps us to think about future risk assessment also. It's not just a paradigm where we're thinking, okay, as a patient, you've come to me with 10 different symptoms and I have to solve that. That's half my battle.
Like those symptoms.
That's half my battle. After I'm through with that, as a good practitioner, I want to prevent the future disease
also.
And we have the highest scientific data, which is very concrete at this point, to be able to say, okay, if I change this, I'm definitely going to reduce your risk of this disease, because we have trials where we change these markers and it actually reduces the risk of heart attacks and strokes. So it's not just correlations.
These are actually clinical interventions, right?
Where we are changing biomarkers and we are reducing events. I'll come to this when we speak about like some other topics, aage jaake, about practical examples of how we do this. So this is why prospective studies are so powerful, because you can understand the future risk. So what might happen is, I'll give you an example. So the WHO cutoff for hemoglobin for diagnosing anemia is I think under 12.
Alright.
So or I think it's under 11. It's one of those two. So if it's above 11, they will say that you don't have anemia, and if it's under 11, then they will say that you have anemia diagnosis. But if you just go by those ranges are coming from looking at people who are having symptomatic issues in the present, right? So the whole idea is that by the time a person develops symptoms, there's already some damage and that's already done. When we do prospective studies, we get to see what's the most optimal, and what reduces the risk of a future outcome more, rather than most optimal for preventing the future risk associated with that marker. So for hemoglobin, being above 11 might be enough to not have anemia.
Alright.
Okay, but that doesn't mean that being above 11 itself and being let's say between 11 to 14 for men we're talking about, even being between 11 and 14 is increasing your risk of chronic kidney disease.
Oh, so just you're just looking for anemia, but just because you don't have anemia with those,
it doesn't mean
you
that
might have some other problem
in the future.
Of low levels of hemoglobin.
Yes, exactly.
Oh, alright.
We can, I think B12 examples say it will get more solidified. So a proper B12 deficiency in the normal ranges is considered to be when your B12 drops under 200.
Alright.
Okay, but that's associated with severe symptoms. We have good interventional trials showing that even a B12, it's called subclinical or suboptimal B12, between 200 to 400. Even when people are found who have those levels and we supplement the B12 to get above 400, they have improvements. So this is the whole idea with the functional ranges.
Also,
we're
the
not
ranges
waiting.
Are very huge,
wide.
Wide.
Exactly. So in functional medicine, I am sitting and specifically this is what I do for the students I teach and for my patients. I'm trying to find the ranges which can help me pick up a problem the earliest. Like even for fasting glucose, pre-diabetes will be considered above 100, diabetes will be considered above 125. but we have very good data showing that there is some increased plaque formation even at a glucose above 90, like between 90 to 100. So we're trying to catch earlier milder dysfunctions and pick up the problem early rather than waiting for like later stage thing to happen. That's how I get the reference ranges, by looking at the prospective cohort studies, because it gives me idea about future risk. And then above that we have randomized control trials. So people think randomized control trials are at the top. They are.
That is what I felt.
They are. I'll just like it's true, but it's a bit more nuanced than that. So why a randomized control trial is considered to be definitive in proving cause and effect is because you can keep everything else the same. And you just change one thing. So even in an observation study, even a prospective study, the researchers might adjust for like 10 different things. They might adjust for smoking, drinking, age, sex, like whatever common things. But there still might be some other things they haven't thought of, or that we don't know impact health yet, which might be influencing the results. So that possibility is always there with a prospective cohort study also. Even if it's well adjusted, you might still have something which could be influencing the result other than the main thing you're trying to study. So that's why the randomized control trials give you a clear answer as to cause and effect hai ki nahi hai. So those are the strengths of a randomized control trial. But it has weaknesses also. It's very expensive to run. Very expensive to run. If you can't do long-term randomized control trials, if you do long-term randomized control trial, it will end up becoming like an observational study.
That's true.
Because compliance fir gir jata hai. You can't like lock people up in a ward or something for 5 years and make them do the same thing. Like compliance drops. We see this. It's often a saying that any like long-term RCT lands up becoming a epidemiology study.
This is one thing a lot of people say, that on any topic, that this does not have enough randomized control tests backing it. But bro, they don't understand that you don't see people sitting there waiting for you to take them in a lab and test on them. They're people like us who are just paid money to do. You can't lock people up for a long period of time and just see results. So randomized control trial, the biggest disadvantage is this only, that very difficult to practically do the application. That is one thing that I just wanted to add on.
For sure. So we have that, and then even a level above that, we have meta-analysis and systematic reviews. Here is where we are taking all of the individual prospective cohort studies or the randomized control trials, and we do statistical analysis on all of them to see if there's a collective effect. So let's say we have like 5 randomized control trials on blood sugar and berberine. Okay, and 4 of them show an effect. One of them is like neutral. So if you were to put those in meta-analysis, there are ways to perform statistical analysis on them and then see the net effect. Okay, overall, what is the effect of berberine from all of the trials combined? That's the most powerful form of evidence that we have, because you're looking at multiple replicated randomized control trials. You're not just looking at one. So even with, science is always, as I said, it's a way of reducing uncertainty. Even if you have one RCT on the subject, it can still be some bias might be there of the researcher. There might be some issues because of which it might be done on a certain subset of people, which might not be translatable to everyone. What we want ideally is replication of science. Like ek jagah study hoti hai, theek hai, but then you want it to be like consistency throughout different populations and stuff. That's when the confidence keeps growing. So that's how the scientific hierarchy works. There's a third form of evidence that's come up in the last decade or so. It's called Mendelian randomization. So with that, we can actually look at genetic mutations in people, which we know affect, like certain blood markers in a certain way, or the risk of disease in a certain way. And then we can see people with those mutations, people without those mutations, how do they fare. So if we take LDL cholesterol as an example, we know people who have higher levels of LDL cholesterol from birth have multiple, I think 10 to 15 times higher heart disease risk compared to those who don't have those mutations, like those familial hypercholesterolemia
but
mutations.
This is at an early age.
They're born with this. So you're looking at people, it's like nature's randomized control trial, because everything else is the same for the person. It's just that one gene that's
when a person is born, are you looking at the DNA or like their cell structure? And
we're looking at specific
measuring actual cholesterol levels of those like kids.
I'll tell you. So there are something called SNPs. Thoda ye technical ho jayega. I'll try to keep it as simple as possible. It's called single nucleotide polymorphisms. So we all have millions of genes, and we can have variants in them which increase or decrease certain things. So we have PCSK9 karke ek gene hota hai. Usme you can have mutations which influence the LDL levels. Okay. ApoB rather, but just keep it at LDL because everyone knows LDL cholesterol. Like it's popular now that way since a long time. So depending on, so let's say we did a like Mendelian randomization study. we took one subset of people who had this genetic mutation in PCSK9, which basically reduces the LDL receptor. Okay, so you land up having a lot of LDL in your bloodstream because the mutation of reduces the number of receptors that the liver has for LDL. So there's less LDL being pulled out of circulation. You have more floating in the bloodstream. That particle is going to go in the artery wall and start plaque formation.
True.
Okay, so people who have those mutations, you can look at their outcomes. You can follow them for decades and see what are their heart disease rates. And you can follow the other group, it doesn't have those mutations. And you can see the heart disease rates and then do statistical analysis and see the relative risk increase.
But are these adjusted for other lifestyle changes also, or this is only?
No, you're only looking at one variable out here.
All right.
Because those people are followed for decades. So that's another level of evidence that we have now. Ideally, when we're trying to ascertain or make our opinion on any scientific subject, we want a confluence of all these three. That's when we have really, really high level of confidence.
Yeah, true.
Another level of evidence that comes within prospective studies only that I didn't discuss is that you're making a changes and you're not waiting for the outcome. I would say in randomized control trials. So we are making changes and RCTs can be looking at the end outcome. Let's take heart disease for example.
Yeah.
So you might have a RCT with fish oil and we're looking at itna dose dene se how many heart attacks are happening less. Contrast that, you don't have to wait to even look at a heart attack. You can look at intermediate biomarkers. Or you can look at the thickness of the artery. So these are also come in the category of RCTs, but you're looking at biomarkers or
early signs
radiology are we seeing plaque formation and CT scans and stuff. So that's also a level that we have.
This comes under prospective observation.
This would come under randomized control trials only because the design is you're not waiting for the end outcome to happen, but you're looking at some kind of intermediate thing. जिस पे काफी science है. Like for example, we know that LDL cholesterol is causal in heart disease. So you can do.
You'll get in trouble for saying that.
No, I'll elaborate on that. But let's say it's the main causal factor. There are other things that increase the risk, but it's one of the primary causal factors. So you can wait for a heart attack to happen by doing a trial with let's say fiber or statins or whatever. But you can also do a trial where you're just looking at LDL kitna bada after doing this, or there's a lot of trials like that, short-term trials where we just look at changes in biomarkers. The caveat being we should know for sure that the biomarker is causal. Then we can say a lot about it, and we have a lot of literature on LDL knowing that it's a causal thing, so it makes sense to look at that as a biomarker. So that's the broad category of how the evidence spans. I didn't touch on animal studies or mechanistic studies. That comes even lower than the neighborhood example. That's funnily enough, that's what most of the internet uses to make arguments.
I feel everything is an evidence. Even one person, if there is something happening with one, that is also an evidence. The quality of that evidence might be low versus a person, a result that you get from a lab, but everything is an evidence.
That's true. So how I think about it is the lower forms of evidence are very useful for researchers. They should not be
direction
for them to get clues. So I'll give you very practical examples. They did some studies on some type of monkey where they fed them a lot of saturated fat and they could induce plaque in the arteries. That was some, I think rhesus macaque monkey or some don't hold me to the exact thing, but some monkeys there was research and they found they could give saturated fat at high levels and induce plaque in the arteries. Okay, and they did the same thing with mufas, they could not do that. So animal studies, and then there's a category called cell research. So scientists will be looking at a cell line and then this gets extremely geeky, and the people who will use this kind of evidence might sound very smart, but it's really early. It's very early. You can't make any claims based on that kind of research because the cells are very complex. You have millions of different mechanisms, and even if you think you understand one or two, there might be some different things going on that will give you the actual opposite result. So those things are not supposed to be looked at by normal people. It's only of use to researchers because they look at those kind of early research and they get clues. Okay, how do we design our observation study? How do we design our randomized control trial based on those early clues?
So you're saying we can't quote animal studies on Instagram and make our point to sound like we know everything and make people believe in your own agenda.
और ये खाली मेरा theory नहीं है, मतलब it's not like I'm saying this so you have to think like this. I'll explain the rationale or the logic also behind why I'm saying this. We have studies comparing cell studies and animal studies to randomized control trials. So researchers will take one question, like let's take the effect of fats on heart disease. So saturated fat का effect क्या है? तो they will compare के cell studies में क्या mechanism scientists are discovering and उसका translation rate क्या है? मतलब how many of those initial discoveries land up being confirmed by interventional trials? The conversion rate is abysmal. It's like 5 or 10%. You compare that to animal studies, it's somewhere around the same. But if we compare the translation rate between observational research and randomized control trials, the conversion rate is very high. Like 60-70% of the observational studies will land up being confirmed in randomized control trials.
In animals?
No. Let me dial it back down. So I was saying there's cell research and animal research.
Okay, alright.
Okay, उसपे studies है कि how many of those findings, like let's say in an animal study, I gave the LDL example. Let's say we tested saturated fat, we gave it to animals, LDL बढ़ गया उनका, plaque formation आ गया. That's an animal study discovery. Okay, and let's say we take a cell and we see कि हम लोग saturated fat ज़्यादा दे रहे हैं cell line को, and we're seeing increased like plaque, like the foam cells are increasing, which are the precursors to the plaque formation in the artery. So all of those are examples of very early research, which typically influencers and all will cite कि भाई ये cell line में we gave this and this happened, so this is inflammatory or this is toxic, so you don't have it or you fear this. That's uska translation rate. Like let's say that we don't have any randomized control trials or no observation studies that have been done on this question yet. And if I was to just run with this, if I was to just look at this level of evidence and start making claims and start telling people like cut your saturated fat down or whatever, the chance of that being confirmed in a human interventional trial years down is maybe 5 to 10%. Very low level of conversion in terms of confirmation.
I have a question related to this. So first I'll finish that. What is Yohan's hierarchy of evidence?
Okay, so I gave a breakdown of all different kinds of studies. Usme se, as I said, my maximum confidence will come if the biomarker studies, the observational studies, the genetic studies, and the randomized control trials. Ideally, it would be even higher if there are meta-analysis on all of these individual things. You can have a meta-analysis where you're collecting multiple randomized control trials, they show an effect.
So meta-analysis is studies of studies. You can
like you're collecting all the individual studies on a given question.
You're asking a question, and whatever question you're asking, you're taking studies.
Whatever trials are there.
And then
let's take practical examples. Like let's take statins and heart disease reduction. So there are randomized control trials done with statins which show reduction in like heart events. So you take all of those randomized control trials. There are multiple of them. There's like 20, 25 or more. You take all of them. You analyze all of them together. Is there a collective effect? Because you might find outlier studies, like one study is showing effect, one study is showing like
what is the majority showing?
What is the trend leaning towards when you consider all of them together? Okay, and is there still like a collective effect after considering all of them and doing analysis on them? Okay, let's say meta-analysis says yes, like statins reduce heart disease. That's your first line of evidence. वो आ गया. Then we can do observational studies. So we might look at people's intake of statins in the general population and see the rates of heart disease. As I said, like it allows you to look at much more people. The studies will be adjusted for various things. Do we still see effect when all those studies are collected and do we still see? Usme bhi dikhta hai. Then we see the Mendelian randomization. There are multiple studies, genetic studies looking at genes which reduce or increase LDL levels and what is the impact on heart disease. We see in meta-analysis of those also we see that there is an effect. So when these three come together and combine, that's when you have like as close matlab usse zyada evidence you cannot have in science. Okay, that's the highest level when you have meta-analysis on all these three pointing in the same direction. Anything under than this, like let's say now the observational studies and the randomized control trials are conflicting. Okay, usme fir you can't just throw your hands up and say we don't know. Like it's conflicting. You have to be literate enough to dig through all the studies, understand कि ये studies में क्यों result आए, ये studies में क्यों नहीं आए. Oftentimes the researchers will only write it. Researchers are like some of the smartest people in the field. So they will know whatever trials are published on that. They will reference even the opposing trials. They'll tell you कि इसमें क्यों effect दिखा, what makes our study different from that. So you have to analyze the specifics of each thing and then see if you can make any informed opinion based on like deeply analyzing all that data. That's not something lay people can do. You
Yeah,
need
that's
like a very
very
high
true, yeah.
level of knowledge about that given field
Plus
to
passion.
be
Plus
of
passion.
course. That goes without saying, bro.
Yeah.
To be able to make sense
Yeah,
of
yeah, yeah.
conflicting studies.
Yeah.
Sab same jagah point kare, it's
Usme
easy.
to it's
You
easy,
can
yeah,
just read
yeah.
the abstracts and see, okay, this is pointing, this is pointing. So we can have a high degree of confidence. But when it's conflicting, then you need honest experts who can go through all the data. So everyone can't do this. So you have to outsource your opinion to honest experts who
So,
can go through all that and then make sense of the data
out
to
of
you.
yeah. So that means there's a lot of nuance to study. Like my question was hierarchy of studies. So there is no hierarchy of studies. There is a nuance to everything, right?
There's a general hierarchy,
yeah,
as I said.
yeah. General hierarchy is there, but then to make sense out of a study is very.
You have
This
to
is a long
like
story.
really know the terminology used,
Yeah.
the physiology, what words are they even using? Most
हाँ,
people
so
don't
like
know
you should
that.
not you should not fear anyone citing a study and just be like हाँ ये सही बोल रहा है ऐसा नहीं है जो research cite कर रहा है हो सकता है उसको भी research का मतलब पता है
In general, what I can give guidelines for lay people is anyone coming and telling you about a pathway in a cell or an animal study or just like ये country में ये चालू हुआ तो ये rates बढ़ गए, you can't take that stuff serious. Any researcher coming, you should have to look at the quality of the evidence they're citing. If they're citing a randomized control trial, if they're citing prospective cohort study, genetic studies, you can like take them reasonably, like in terms of high level of confidence in what they're saying. Another attribute of any influencer, like you can probably do a segment on how to spot good influencers also. But
podcast altogether.
the main thing, the main crux is genuine researchers who are like properly studying the field. They won't make absolutist statements. They'll not hype a certain thing up. They'll not say like this food is a toxin, this food is poison, this food is a superfood. Essay statements you'll rarely see from.
Yeah.
They're very measured. They use their words in a very careful way.
yeah.
The study shows it may increase risk. They'll add like 10 different
Caveats
ifs
to it.
and buts.
Yeah,
कि
yeah.
ये होगा तो ही ऐसे है. And that might make an observer think कि this person's dumb
Confused.
or he doesn't know enough. But that's actually the mark of a good researcher, that they're giving a lot of nuance when they are covering any given topic.
I wanted to throw some light on difference between a mechanism and an outcome. There are a lot of people get confused in this, so I wanted to throw some light on this thing.
Okay, let's take a good example. Weight loss lete.
Let's boil it
will
down
be
to,
more relatable.
Let's boil it down to what is a mechanism and what is the outcome. So like, just start from there.
Okay, so when we're talking about mechanisms, we're mainly looking at cell studies and animal studies, mainly cell studies more so, where scientists are studying the effect of something on a cell line in a petri dish. Okay, so our cells are incredibly complex.
Yeah.
They have thousands of biochemical pathways, Krebs cycle, citric acid cycle, electron transport chain. There's tons of stuff going on. Like cell has different parts, उसमें अलग चीजें चल रही है, tons of transcription factors. It's like very incredibly
very
complex. Like it's an understatement to even say that. So the scientists and researchers can make certain changes to the cell and see whether certain pathways are upregulated. Like commonly people are asked about nutrition, you might have heard of mTOR or autophagy, or like people look at these pathways, or they might look at the mitochondria and see electrons, like how the electrons are being used and uska output kya hai, how much inflammatory products are being made in the cell. So that's what we mean when we say mechanisms. We're just looking at a cell and we are trying to look at the pathway of a certain area of the cell, like the mitochondria or different aspects, and then see the effect of something on that particular pathway and the outcome of that. When you talk about outcome, we're talking about humans. Okay, so you're looking at how to make that research practical. The limitations of using something in a cell is that quantity typically बहुत ज़्यादा रहती है. Okay, so like you might use a certain, like you might give a cell a certain thing, but the quantity of that will be much larger than what you can ever give to any normal human. So typically in cell studies we see that the doses used are like really high compared to what you would ever give to someone. So that makes the results like not translatable at all. Then there's the issue where once you get into pathways, as we were discussing off air, like it can make someone think they're really smart because you know all these technical geeky terms. You understand कि भाई Krebs cycle क्या है, उसमें have lactate, pyruvate, like NADPH. You can you can become a geek fest.
Yeah.
Like if you listen to a podcast, they'll tell you about all these different aspects, and they're like,
You'll go read
why
it, yeah.
if you increase the omega-3, there's a fats enzyme, and then it has to get like ALA has to get converted. You think you're really
Delta
smart,
6 desaturase.
but as I said, the cells are incredibly complex. For everything we understand, there's probably like more mechanisms we haven't discovered, and there are other compensatory mechanisms which often we don't understand. कि चलो pathway समझ भी आता है, we might not understand how the effects end up translating. Let me give you a very practical example. So for a long time, lot of the internet, lot of influencers have pushed this idea that vegetable oils are toxic, and that omega-6, because of how it's going to go in the pathway, it's going to interfere with the utilization of omega-3s. That's been a dominant narrative for many influencers. I have believed that as well. So that's why I'm saying from personal experience, it's a very good example to use. And people often thought of omega-6, like there are couple of types of omega-6. The main one is linoleic acid. Okay, this is an essential fatty acid. The body doesn't make it, so you have to take it in. And if you look at the pathway, some researchers made out an argument in mechanistic studies that like the linoleic acid will interfere with the conversion of the plant-based omega-3 to the actual EPA DHA that we use. So that's why, and then we had some research about the omega-6 to 3 ratio also. And then people talk about, oh, ancestrally we had so much, and like now the omega-6 to 3 ratio has gone up so much. So these kind of arguments were used to make the narrative that omega-6 is pro-inflammatory, right? This is an example of mechanistic research where you're just looking at pathways. Why is that not true? Okay, when we actually take omega, like linoleic acid, and we give it to people, you can look at the
actual human.
Yeah, actual human. We look at the tissue levels of omega-6. We look at the blood levels. We find that the higher that is, the better the outcomes are. We have again like randomized control trials with seed oils, where we see no increase in inflammation. Like in fact, there's a drop in certain studies. Even meta-analysis of randomized control trials with seed oils, looking at CRP levels, which is the dominant inflammatory marker, like gold standard, what most studies look at. No increase. Even they've looked at like 20, 30 other inflammatory markers, no increase at all. Trials lasting 3 months, 6 months. Heated seed oils also no increase.
You know, a lot of flag for this.
I mean, like people can understand very well with this example that if you make opinions based on early research, most of the times when actual proper trials are done, you'll end up being proven wrong because there are always holes. And we can look at these examples and understand. There's another good example of HDL. For a long time, even this is a common narrative you must have heard, कि भाई, a lot of people will tell you your LDL high है तो ठीक है, as long as your HDL is also high and your triglycerides are low, right? So this was a thing that was even believed by many good scientists also, because we had many long-term observational studies showing that low HDL levels increase risk of heart disease. So there was a lot of hype around trying to develop drugs for HDL to increase HDL. And they invested billions of dollars in developing those drugs, but all the trials failed. Like, and this whole idea that pharmaceutical companies can just fund any study and get the result they want, it's clearly like, I mean, you can influence it a bit, but typically if someone's influencing a study, if you're a good researcher, you can spot there will be issues in the method section. You can't just throw a study out because it's funded. You have to go through it, and you will be able to find issues in the design or like the way in which they looked at certain things or the kind of tools they used. Again, all of this is very technical.
It's traceable. Like it's traceable. Like
if you know your stuff and you're technical enough, you can find issues in how the study has been designed if funding is influencing that. So the observation studies and early research showed us that HDL has a connection, but actually developing drugs for that and increasing that, and not just one kind of drugs, fibrates, niacin, CETP inhibitors, the different classes of drugs, like how for LDL we have different classes of drugs, no effect whatsoever. So we see it again and again. This is not just a theoretical thing, but most times findings we see early in animals and cells, we don't see it being confirmed in humans, which is why we should always wait for outcome data rather than going for the mechanisms and the cells.
How can a normal person differentiate between if I am citing something or if I am saying something online or if I am coming and telling you something? How should a normal person distinguish between is he talking from a mechanistic perspective or an outcome based perspective?
Okay, let's take a practical example. Let's say I'm an influencer, I make a video today and I tell you omega-3s are really good for you because the ALA that you have from flax seeds or the EPA DHA you have from fish it's going to go and get converted to prostaglandins, and then these prostaglandins are going to have potent anti-inflammatory activity, and it's in the cell it's going to bring down the overall inflammation, and as a result you will have less heart disease. If I'm not citing an actual study showing reduction in inflammation, if I'm not citing a study showing a result like reduction in all-cause mortality or heart disease or something, then I'm purely relying on cell-based theories. Okay, so that's something you should not take seriously. And I fell for this a lot as well. Like I went keto because of like all of these. I remember reading Dr. Mokola's book. Like he used to be one of my biggest inspirations. He's the guy who got me down the whole keto rabbit hole.
Alright.
I'm glad I went down. It taught me a lot about practical experience. और अच्छे है, सीखते हैं. When you fall for shit and then like come out of it, you learn the issues. Yeah, it was quite a journey. But I look back and listening to this podcast also, what I remember, like most of the stuff you would cite is all mechanisms. Like the ketone bodies generate less inflammation inside the cell, or like the ketones are going to go and increase this gene transcription factor, and then that's going to increase longevity. So if you know that they are all talking about these mechanisms inside cells, just feel free to easily discard that. Like honestly, I'm saying after years of even like believing in those things, it's just not something we can translate. It's all very useful and valuable for researchers, but
I
not
mean,
for us.
we're not saying that does not have a place or it is all bullshit or garbage. No, but the application of it is for someone else and not for us.
Yeah, exactly. You summarize it really well.
Exactly. But now that brings me to when we talk about, I know that you did a very good experiment by yourself by getting your lab reports, and you send your samples to some 14, 15 different labs. So what was the result, and why is it important to get your tests like your blood samples and all to get it done from a good lab?
So I've been testing myself comprehensively since 2018. So I've been doing like 6-month blood tests for the first couple of years. Now I've got to the stage I'm doing it every month. I want to move to a point where I'm doing it like twice a month. So because I'm getting more aggressive with my interventions and stuff. Primarily because I use my own data to teach other people, and I can show results in that way. So I used ThyroCare for a very long time, and after some point I started researching more and getting deeper into blood tests and like mastering all of the different blood biomarkers and stuff. And I started learning a lot about the nuances. Like there is a time factor, there's a temperature factor, there is just the machine they're using itself and the technology that's used. A lot of these things can affect the results. Even just like there's a whole thing in India where many companies sometimes do sync testing. Like they will just it sound like a technical term, but it just means that they'll take your sample and chuck it down the wash basin and give you a fake result. Yeah. So this happens quite a bit. So my pursuit started to find a reliable lab, because I was like, I'm doing all this and I'm spending so much time and energy and effort. I want the results to be as reliable as possible. And even other than the lab, there are many things you should be following for the result to be accurate. Like
everything is dependent on those results.
Like I'll give you some examples. Like a lot of people look at मैं कभी किसी को PDF भेजता हूँ मेरा, so they look at the list and they're like, भाई ये तो no one's ever told us that you have to do all of this stuff before a test. I was like, yeah, that's because I'm reading every study and I'm actually telling you how you can get the most accurate results. Like for testosterone, okay, there's a circadian rhythm to testosterone. I've seen this myself. I tested my testosterone. We'll talk about it later, but I tested it like I think 2-3 weeks back at 7:30 in the morning. I changed my blood test timing. So at 7:30 my testosterone came at 400, and I was like, shit, like I'm doing everything right, and I'm like every single thing for testosterone is like optimized. So ये कैसे हुआ? I tested it again 2 days later, again it came at 400. I was like, okay, so the confirmed result. Then I was researching more and I came across there's a circadian rhythm, and that testosterone in the morning peaks at around 10:30. After that I did my testosterone at 10:30, and guess what it was? 700.
What?
Yeah, 300 point increase just by changing the time.
So there's a quick hack, guys. If you want high testosterone, get it tested at 10 in the morning.
But do you understand how nuanced it is for every single marker?
Point is it's like almost double, right?
That's what I'm saying. And when you see the curve, like the studies they've done for the circadian rhythm, it's perfectly predictable. Like if you look at the graph, the 7:30 line or 10:30 wale mein almost double difference. Let's say like it's almost a doubling going from 7:30 to 10:30 in the studies where they look at the circadian rhythm. Similarly for cortisol.
Why is it so? Why is it so?
Some hormones tend to have a circadian rhythm. It's not just exclusive to testosterone, but even cortisol peaks at 8
I was
and
about
then
to
it
say
declines.
the same thing. Is it related to the cortisol? Because when you wake up because the cortisol levels are going up. So is there an inverse relation between cortisol and testosterone?
Cortisol has an inverse relationship with melatonin, not with testosterone.
Not testosterone.
So melatonin also has a circadian rhythm that primarily explains the cortisol circadian rhythm. For testosterone, we're not sure. We just know that there is
is a
this.
circadian
We don't
rhythm.
really
Alright.
like fully
Understand.
understand. There's more research to be done in that area. But this is to say that just something like this can influence one of the results. Taking
So much.
taking something like biotin is something a lot of people take. High dose biotin, which is very common in, like, when I say high dose, I just mean above 1 milligram, which is a very standard dose. Like
yeah.
people will use 5 milligrams or 10 milligrams in any like hair growth formula or something like that. That can throw off many results. Your thyroid hormones, your antibodies,
Really?
like a lot of results. Even like vitamin results can get messed up.
Because you mean high levels of biotin or just having a
Biotin supplement. A biotin
If I'm on a
supplement
biotin
above
supplement-
1 milligram
Okay.
will throw off 40% of your lab results.
If I'm on a
It
biotin
can give you a
supplement-
it can give you a false cancer diagnosis. It can give you
No,
like
if I'm on a biotin supplementation
Yeah,
and
yeah.
if I'm off it, then I'll get a.
it takes 3 to 4 days for the
Okay.
levels to get flushed out, and then you can test. But thankfully, like, iska awareness thoda bada hai, so some labs will mention it, but the research shows you have to be off it for 3-4 days. If you look at Lalpat's recommendation, they just recommend 1 day stay off. That way, so it's
But they
incredibly.
don't even tell this to people.
That's what I'm saying, na. So it's something like this which can throw off so many test results. It's not even like common public awareness when almost everyone's doing health checkups these
It's
days.
bizarre, man.
That's what I'm saying, bro. This is incredibly complex field where every single thing is like, there's tiny things that can affect. Vitamin C, for example, like if you take certain dose, it can throw off your bilirubin result. ऐसे बहुत चीज़ है, मतलब. So all of this is
factors can affect
all
your-
of this is factored into my rules, like before testing. So it's I'm just giving like people a landscape for how technical this can get, which is why you want to like ideally work with someone and not just randomly do tests, because even if you see a certain values of, even if that's a legit value, blood test interpretation is not just about looking at a certain number and then coming to a conclusion. Like it can be most markers are affected by 10-15 different things. Skilled practitioners have to rule out different factors and then rule in what applies to you by doing differential diagnosis. Uske baad we can tell you, okay, this is high, it means this. Or if it's even relevant, like sometimes you might just get like the time factor might influence some result. Like let's say the sample has been sitting in the fridge. Even if it's sitting at a fridge in the lab and it's taken like, half a day or so to get to the point of processing, which is common, it happens a lot. It can increase the potassium, it can increase the phosphorus.
It can increase.
Yeah, just like if you just put the sample immediately for processing as soon as it's taken, or if you wait for 4 hours, 8 hours, 12 hours, it's a gradual increase that you see, and it's clinically meaningful.
But I mean, that's not really convenient also. Like, it's not practically possible for you to just take out a sample and just give it for testing.
But मैं वही कह रहा हूँ, that's all of the studies we have on these ranges. You know how they happen. They take the samples, they freeze them immediately, and then they process it as soon as possible.
Oh, right.
Yeah, so this is stuff I have learnt about just trying to perfect my own markers. कि भाई ये क्यों नहीं ठीक हो रहा? Then I dig in and I find like, okay, fuck, like this is also an interfering factor that I need to consider that way. Like the timing itself. Like if I just went with the 7:30 timing, I'd be like, I'm doing
most
something.
people do.
I thought I'd be doing something wrong. I'll think about 10 different things. What are my vitamin D levels? What are my zinc? ये कैसा है? Like my sleep is not good. Whatever, like the things which can affect it. Yeah, but it's just a matter of like you've been doing it incorrectly.
Oh, you've been cheated. So, bro, for an average Joe, if you want to get your blood work done, what are the takeaways from your experiment, and what are the few things that you'll give so that you can get the most optimum result that you're looking for? How can you optimize it for the most?
So I would say firstly in terms of labs, from the 12 labs I tested, there were 4 that had really good results. And when I say really good, I mean I tested 16 different markers from 12 different labs. So you can imagine we're looking at 16 different biomarkers. In 4 labs, all of the 16 have come within 5%.
Oh, right.
So those are the most accurate, because एक भी result कोई fake कर रहा होता है, there'd be something wrong with the machine. 1 or 2 being off is like very easy. Here we're talking about all 16 of them coming within 5%. So those are the most accurate labs I consider. Again, this is a 1-day result. Maybe दूसरे दिन पे करते कुछ lab का अलग scene. So, but in general, like I don't think anyone has even done this kind of experiment, because I followed the media articles on this for a while. So the max I think some news outlet had done is they sent the sample to 3 different labs for only 1 marker, and that's where they found this potassium result being off. So that gave me some clues. Then I started researching more, and I figured out कि problem तो काफी biomarkers के लिए है वैसे. So the best ones are Aarti Labs, Orange, there's Manipal True Test, and there's Apollo. These ones had like
we have not been paid from any of
bhai,
these.
like no commission, nothing. Like this is just like pure trying to help people out to get the best results. And then I'll probably share the document like for viewers if they want to see it. So I've ranked it also. Like these are the top 4. Then there are some which had the results between 10 to 15, and then Redcliffe was the worst. I will say that Redcliffe was the worst. Like guys, don't. I wouldn't recommend using Redcliffe that way because they were like results were fully off.
So one point is you get it done from a good lab, and the other point is like you said, timing is important. So what is ideal timing for that, and
in general, try to get it at a point where it reaches the lab the fastest. So if you're doing it with these 4 labs that I mentioned, then the quality control and the timing and all is very accurate. Like Aarti and Orange specifically, they try to process the result the fastest. So it gets processed within 2-3 hours of like you giving the sample. That's an important thing. Say like timing, you can try to time it like 10:30ish if you're a man for your testosterone results. If you're thinking about cortisol, 8 a.m. is the best. So timing may have found like an association for 2 of these with the results kind of being accurate. Baki ka itna time ka effect nahi hai that way. It's more a matter of how long the sample is taken like to reach the place. So that problem is solved by just like giving it to these labs so they do it as fast as possible. Because I have experience with other labs, the result will be reported at like 6 o'clock in the evening, 7 o'clock. But in look ka like 12 noon, 1 o'clock tak काफी आ जाता है वैसे. So you can even check it live. It comes faster. So these are just like basic recommendations in terms of like what to do before. Don't have biotin supplements. Don't have like vitamin C supplements for like 3-4 days before the test. Like avoid these 2. Baki supplements like you should stop 1 day prior and fast like for 10 to 12 hours for certain lipid markers and stuff to be accurate. Like, and then there are a lot of nuances around hormone testing and stuff. But zyada technical ho jayega. This is good for like
for an average person.
Basic. If you're thinking of a comprehensive health checkup for any of these places, like these are good rules to keep in mind.